Hi again, everybody. Welcome into our Atlanta studios here at NBA TV. This is Game Time. I'm Matt Weiner along with Steve Smith. David Aldridge will be along shortly from New York, where Saturday night owners and players met for 8.5 hours, their first bargaining session in 8 days. It ended with a deadline issued by the league, frustration on the part of the players, and some twists on persistent points of contention, including a new approach to the fundamental issue of how to divide basketball-related income.
It's complex, but it's a 49-51 band proposal where we seek to have a projected growth in revenues, and whereby anything above that projection would be shared not at 50%, which is the mid-range, but at 57%, designed to move in a robust projection if we had significant growth to 51. That was the suggestion by the mediator. Yes. And 49 would be the bottom.
These are professional basketball players, the finest athletes in the world. How do you think they feel about threats? How do you think they feel about efforts at intimidation? Who negotiates in good faith by saying, it's this proposal? We made a proposal to them, and when they came back, they said, it's this proposal or 47%, we'll make it worse, take it or leave it. That's where they were. This is not good faith to the fans. It's not good faith to the players. The players will not be intimidated. They want to play. They want a season. But they are not going to sacrifice the future of all NBA players under these types of threats of intimidation. It's not happening. It's not happening on Derek Fisher's watch. It's not happening on Billy Hunter's watch. It's not happening on the watch of this executive committee.
We were prepared to stay here until the sun came up to get this deal done. And so on that note, we will, obviously as a group, assess our situation, assess where we are, make sure that we're communicating clearly to our players where things stand. But right now, we've been given the ultimatum, and our answer is that's not acceptable to us.
Frustration on the part of Derek Fisher and outright indignance from Jeffrey Kessler, the lead negotiator for the Players Association. Here is some of what was bandied about during the negotiation. The owner's latest proposal includes that 49% to 51% so-called band for BRI, a compromise on a luxury tax proposal, a variable mid-level exception, which gets very complicated based on luxury tax teams versus non-luxury taxpayers, no sign and trade exceptions for the luxury tax players. And most importantly, perhaps, this offer is on the table until the close of business on Wednesday, after which Commissioner Stern has promised a lesser offer starting at 47% of BRI for the players. From the union side, a BRI proposal of 51%, 1% of which would go to benefits for retired players. The players would also like a higher mid-level exception for taxpayers than what the owners are proposing. That would facilitate player movement, as would a lower repeater tax penalty for taxpayers, and a higher revenue for teams slightly above the luxury tax. In other words, fewer penalties for those who occasionally dip into luxury tax territory. Once again, David Aldridge joins us now from New York in the wake of this 8.5-hour negotiating session. And after hearing from both sides, DA, what are the headlines for you?
Well, obviously, the league setting a deadline for Wednesday for the union to accept the current proposal on the table before the proposals start getting demonstrably worse is the major headline, Matt. But keep in mind, the players came down or made a proposal that they would come down to 51% on BRI if the league would accept their version of the system with regard to the luxury tax-paying teams in specific. That did not happen. Now, right now, both sides are saying there's no room for negotiation, but after a long, long time, after months, they finally are at the same number, essentially, on BRI. Now, I know there are conditions for both sides on that, but it would seem to me that those conditions are things that you could work on in the next 72 hours to see if you could breach the gap and maybe get this deal done before Wednesday. That's where I see it. Obviously, they have different constituencies that are leaning on them, and so you don't know how willing they're going to be to negotiate in the next 3 or 4 days.
Can ownership relax some on some of the system issues that Derek Fisher referred to, the luxury tax stuff, the exceptions out there, and still satisfy their small market owners to get this thing done?
Well, you know, they don't want to give very much because they feel like, you know, any little bit they give to the luxury taxpayers is going to make it that much easier for them to continue to sign players. And their whole point on this is to try to limit those teams from being able to sign players in a given period. You know, they talk about that competitive balance again, and it's the difference, frankly, I mean, from the Lakers being able to sign a guy like Ron Artest, for example, you know, to a mid-level exception. What the league would have you do is have what they call a mini mid-level, which would be starting at $2.5 million for just 2 years, and you can only use it every other year. The players agree that you should only be able to use it every other year if you're a taxpayer, but they want the regular mid-level exception starting at $5 million and going out 4 years. So essentially no change, really, other than the length of the contract. So that's where the gulf is between them right now, and that's what they would have to work on in the next couple of days.
DA, I totally agree with you that basically the BRI, they're about at 50%. But I think, in my opinion, if you agree, it comes down to right now the system issue is where the players seeing the owner's proposal is not giving them flexibility for players to be able to have movement to any team they want. And I think right now what the owners are saying is you will have that movement, but it will cost these different teams, the high dollar teams, a lot more money. So I think Derek Fisher on the owner's side are saying this is no flexibility and no movement.
Well, where you are right now, Smith, is they both agreed on increasing the luxury tax. I mean, the numbers are, and I'm going to turn my paper over so I can see this. They've both agreed to start at $1.50 for the first $5 million, then $1.75 for the next $5 million, $2.50 for the next $5 million, and $3.25 for the next $5 million. So they've agreed on that. Where they disagree is that the league wants to put what it calls a repeater tax on teams that exceed the tax threshold 3 times in any 5-year period. They want to add an additional dollar to those numbers I just mentioned to you if you are a taxpayer paying tax for a third time. The union only wants to tax you 50 cents if you're a taxpayer for the third or fourth time. Now, I know these numbers, people are just throwing themselves on their tables and their beds right now saying, I don't care about these numbers. But over a 10-year period, guys, it's millions of dollars. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. That's why they fight for every percent. That's why they fight for every 0.5%, because we're not talking about a 1-year deal. We're talking about a 10-year deal. So it's going to be locked in for a long time.
We heard Derek Fisher all but dismiss most of the system proposals out of hand. Will he find, as he communicates with his constituency, that they are generally just as opposed as he seemed to be at this late date?
You know, Matt, I mean, it's hard, you know, unless you poll 400 players, it's hard to be able to say with any certainty what the players want to do. You have a cross-section of guys. Some of whom want to play. They would take 50. Some of whom wouldn't take 50 under any circumstances and are still holding out at 52.5. And you have people in the middle. I mean, so there really is no, you know, monolithic player point of view. You have 450 guys, and you probably have 5 or 6 different positions that those guys take. So it's hard to say what they would accept. I think what the union does not want to do is, you know, they don't want to put it to a vote because I think they know the players would accept. But what they're saying is that they would accept not based on, you know, understanding of the deal, but based on the fact that they want to play. And that's what they don't want to do. They don't want an emotional vote instead of a vote that's more strategic in nature. And whether you agree with that or not, that's what they feel like their job is as members of the executive committee.
DA, let's fast forward to Wednesday and say the union does not accept this deal, and then I guess the consequence will be the owners proposing another deal that's 47% BRI. Say that deal is not accepted. Where do we see now the time frame of where you see more games canceled, or where you see a proposal, in your opinion, Where will the owners go from that standpoint?
I mean, my suspicion, Smitty, is that the owners know that 47 is not acceptable, and you know, they know that the hockey system, which is basically the flex cap that they proposed in July, that was rejected out of hand, will be rejected out of hand again. So now, you know, if that gets canceled, if that gets turned down by the end of next week, I'm sure you'll see more games canceled. Probably the first half of December games would be canceled at that point. So, you know, that's what we are right now, and you know, the league, as is their right, is putting pressure on the union to accept this deal that they have on the table that they, you know, say is addresses some of the players' needs. Obviously, the union leadership disagrees with that position, but that's where we are. And so I suspect that, you know, if we get to Wednesday and that old offer gets back on the table, it will be summarily rejected and we'll be going in opposite directions. And then you really have to look at whether this season is going to be played at all. And you have to look at whether the players decertify. And certainly if the players wind up decertifying, we will lose the season.
DA, there's obviously disagreement on virtually every front between the two sides, but I thought it was interesting, Derek Fisher's interpretation of what took place during the negotiating session, completely disagreeing with David Stern's contention that the league basically adopted 5 of the 6 proposals put forth by federal mediator George Cohen, when Fisher turned around and said there were no proposals. They were suggestions, basically, that the league adopted and sort of, you know, turned into proposals somehow. What do you make of that fundamental disagreement, and what impact do you believe George Cohen is having on these proceedings?
You know, Matt, frankly, I think it's a semantical distinction. I mean, you know, George Cohen spends a lot of time talking about hypotheticals because that's a way to kind of get people towards a place where they can agree. And that's what mediators do. They try to find common ground. So, yes, one person could say, we accepted what George Cohen said as, you know, in terms of what do you think about this? And the other side could say, but that was never offered by you. You just accepted your best version of what the mediator said or mediator suggested. So, you know, it's the same thing over and over again, where one side says we have to have this and the other side says, no, we have to have this. And no matter where it's coming from, they're still at that same place. At least at least most people can see that the BRI thing is fairly close. Now, you know, Jeffrey Kessler said we're not close at all, but that's because the system stuff is still a problem. Right.
Complicated stuff, and a long night for you. We appreciate the time, as always, DA.
Sure. Thanks, guys.
Well, that is one of the headlines as well from all this. To summarize what DA just said, is that whereas a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, the two sides seem to be fairly close on the system issues and far apart on BRI, we've had a complete 180 now where the BRI is this close and now the system issues are throwing a wrench in everything. What's your takeaway from what just happened?
Well, I think the takeaway is, like you said, I think we all can agree we've got very, very close and pretty much right on the BRI, other than now the system, if that falls in place. But I think right now for me is my big question mark is the consequences that will come after Wednesday if they do not take this deal. Obviously, on the player side, it would be decertification, but we didn't really hear from the owner side if they do not take the Wednesday's proposal and then the next proposal after that goes down to 47%.
Right.
Whether it's 2 weeks or whether the league says now we're talking about, you know, the entire season loss. That's the one thing I didn't hear, and maybe that will come out after they have a written proposal given to the players.
Right. The clock continues to tick. More games are going to go away the longer it continues, and it goes without saying, I suppose, but there are no new negotiating
That's another thing part.
Plans between the two, with the deadline looming on Wednesday afternoon. Much more ahead on this negotiating session from New York City. We'll talk with legal analyst Michael McCann from SI.com when we come back.